30 Minutes with Ron. Welcome to the first 30 Minutes with Ron that's on site here at Cox Communications since the COVID epidemic hit. Ladies and gentlemen, the guest of the day, Mr. What's your name?
Josh Elliott.
Oh, there it is. Yes, Josh Elliott. Ladies and gentlemen, Josh Elliott is a state representative for the state of Connecticut, and his district is the 88th district.
Very good.
Yes, and I grew up in Hamden. They don't want to own me. That they don't tell people that I grew up in Hamden. But yes, I'm a Hamden native, Hamden High School class of 1964, and proud of it. So, Josh, I think I've spoken enough. You think I've spoken enough?
This is your show, Ron. You speak as much as you want.
All right. So, we're on to the Josh part of the show.
Great.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background, like where you were born, what schools you went to, college, all that good stuff?
Sure. I grew up in Guilford on the shoreline. Ended up going to Ithaca College was my undergrad. So I was actually homeschooled for 8 years.
Wow.
So I never went to Hamden High or Guilford High, but I did end up going to Hamden Hall for about 3 years. I went to Ithaca College for my undergrad. Sociology was where my degree was, but criminal justice reform was my emphasis. Graduated, moved down to Virginia a couple years later, worked on a political campaign down there with a buddy of mine who was the campaign manager. We got absolutely crushed in that race. I moved back to Connecticut thinking that I was all set with politics, at the very least electoral politics. Ended up working at the family business, which is Time and Season down the road on Whitney Avenue, and also applied to law school at Quinnipiac Law. And because I got in and started going to school there, everything was in a really close proximity. So I ended up moving to Hamden, and that's what brought me to the house I'm at about 12 years ago, very close to the Cheshire-Hamden border, and been there ever since. Graduated, became an attorney, never practiced, opened up my own business in Shelton called the Common Bond Market, been running that, and then that's when I started getting involved in politics.
So your first run for politics was state rep?
It was state rep. I technically ran for the Democratic Town Committee, which is probably one of the lowest levels of elected office that you can have because you do have to get voted in. But at that time, I did not really work it, but the people that were on the slate really did work it. So
Right.
I ended up winning by about 7 votes, even though I did no work. So that was technically the first race that I was in, aside from running in high school for whether it was for my class or for the school, losing both. But I don't think about those as real races. And then, of course, now I am elected to the State House, and 2016 is when I got elected through a fairly quick and I wouldn't say all that bruising primary, but I'll tell you a little bit about that race,
Oh, yes,
since
please.
I am nipping at the edges. But essentially, I threw my hat in against the sitting Speaker of the House. I had done a lot of work on the Bernie Sanders campaign. That's what got me re-involved in politics in Connecticut. And then the Working Families Party approached me, and they asked me if I would primary the Speaker, and ultimately I said yes. He had announced. I announced myself a week later. A week after that, he announced he was not going to run. So the town was reasonably not very happy with me. And so it was me against the next in line, someone who had been on city council for over a decade. He had been acting mayor for a period of time. And I lost my convention 19-3. People just didn't know who I was. I had 3 months to make my case, and when people were at doors and asking me why people in the town were so frustrated with me, I just said, they don't know me. And so I just spent time making sure that people knew who I was, knew what I was fighting for. I ran a very clean race. Every race I've ever run from back then to now has been really clean. I focus on the issues. That's why I'm doing this. It's not about me. It's about the things that I want to see become reality. So I was able to win my primary 60-40, and I won my general 60-40. I won 2 re-elections to date, and I sit here now as the chairman of the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee, and I represent the 88th District in Hamden.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty good resume.
Yeah, it's not bad.
So now what does this committee that you are chair of do?
So we do 2 different things, fairly discrete. One is anything that involves the community colleges or the state universities. Certainly we work a lot with UConn. There's Charter Oaks, which is our online school. And then anything that's employment advancement related. And I would say largely our committee has not done a lot of work in that area, at least historically. We have another committee called the Commerce Committee, which I think does a lot of work in terms of that employment advancement side. But there are people that are on the committee that really want to take back the reins in terms of that work. So we are starting to do a little bit more work with the Office of Workforce Strategy that the Governor Lamont ended up putting in place. So we do a lot of coordination with them. But we work with the professors. We have bills that are involving whether it's food insecurity on campus or housing insecurity on campus. There's a whole range of things that we work on. There's both A committees and B committees. So we're classified as a B committee. I think the easiest way to think about this is when you're in college, you have that Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, and then the Tuesday, Thursday schedule. So the big committees like judiciary or finance or appropriations that deal with a really wide range of topics with a whole host of ideas that come through their committee. They just need that extra day during the week to be able to do their work. We're considered a little bit smaller because what we focus on is so much more narrow. Yep. So we are a Tuesday, Thursday committee. But I was lucky enough to become a committee chair in my third term, which is pretty quick, and I'm grateful for the work, and it's fun.
Do you run by Robert's rules, your committee?
We do run by Robert's rules, and that was a big lesson of how to incorporate that. You know, if you look back and see what the committees were like when I first started, it was a lot of mistakes. But the thing is, whenever anybody starts, they're making a lot of mistakes, and eventually you get what the process is and what it ought to be, and you can sort of forecast where you're going to have different problems along the way. And now, 2 years in, I can abide by Robert's rules pretty clearly. And so now it's all those little bits and pieces when something doesn't come up very often, how you go through that. But you always have help. You have attorneys from the Office of Legislative Review are always there for meetings, or the Legislative Commissioner's Office, which is really helpful, and they know the process really well. I have an aide that's dedicated exclusively to the Higher Education Committee. Her name is Jeannie, but she also works primarily with me as well. So you have a lot of support. So there is no one person messing up. If we mess up, it's as a group.
Right.
But by and large, the process goes pretty smoothly.
Well, I have found that Robert's rules can be an interesting thing. If you know Robert's rules fairly well, you can almost control a meeting.
Yes.
And sometimes take it out of the control of the chair. I used to be a JC, and some of those meetings would go interminably long, and I would sometimes use Robert's rules to help us to stop the meetings sooner.
Yeah.
When I was in college, we had a fraternity that I was in that went by Robert's rules, and one day the chair member didn't like how things were going, and he declared a national emergency and stopped the meeting.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's in Robert's rules, but it's a good thing to come up with if you ever need it.
It's fine.
Now, ideas either come to you as the chair, or some members come up with ideas, or people in the community come up with ideas.
Correct.
How does it work in what's predominant in your committee?
So we have about 35 bills that came through the committee. And I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to step back a few years, which is that when I was rank and file, one thing that I was always frustrated by was the fact that I felt that chairs were often the main impediment or the main roadblock to getting bills passed.
Yep.
That they needed to have their fingerprints over every single line in every single bill. And the fact is that there is a lot of bills that come through these committees. And so if you do that, you end up really narrowing the ability to get stuff through. And I know that when bills get negotiated back and forth, you have two opposing sides of an issue, not always opposing, but usually different interests at the very least, that are looking over every single line and making sure that it adheres to their interest. So by the time it gets to you as the chair, it's usually pretty polished. Now you can choose to take ownership of it and craft it the way that you want, recognizing that you are then possibly going to anger some people that have been really involved in the process along the way.
Of course.
But one thing that I found, so my primary bill last year was a bill that took 3 years to get over the finish line. This was a bill to make telecommunications free for people who are incarcerated. And one thing that I found worked really well for us was this idea that I was working with one main advocate, and I, of course, was the elected. And what I was able to do was connect her with a lot of people. I thought that she was the best advocate for the work, but I was the person that knew the process really well, and I knew the people really well. And so I always knew the next 3 to 5 people that we needed to talk to. And so I could, at times, would be in a room where we would be, let's say, decision making, and I could choose what we would do. But I knew that if I were choosing on behalf of the advocate, that I would lose a lot of that energy and that forward momentum, which in a way was coming from me or flowing through me, but it really started here. And so what I wanted to make sure was that while I connected the people to the process, I didn't want to be controlling the process. Because there's so many people that try to control the process, and the more people that control it, the harder it is to get things done. And so I take that headspace and try to be a more permissive chair, which is to say, if there's anything that's truly toxic, I will kill that bill, absolutely. But if there are things that are good ideas that need to be worked out, I am happy to help people with that process. So of the 35 bills that are coming through the committee, there's a handful that are from committee members. There's a handful that are from members of the legislature writ large. There's some from advocacy groups. Not too many that just come straight from the public. Generally, anybody from the public is going to be working through one of their reps or senators or an advocacy group. And of those 35, none are mine. They're all bills that have come to me that I'm helping people guide through, because in terms of what my personal priorities are, I'm really attracted to the work of criminal justice reform, tax equity in our state. I'm working on a number of mental health bills, a number of bills that address women's health needs. And so I am working through other people's committees. And I recognize now how, at the very least, being a chair of a committee does give me the ability to work better now with other chairs, because if there's anything that they want through my committee, they know that I'm someone who's easy to work with, and it'll come through. And they still have the 187 legislators that they need to deal with, and the governor's office certainly, but that I am not going to be an impediment to their ideas.
Now, you mentioned that you could kill a bill.
Yes.
How do you just kill a bill? Robert's rules?
It's called holding a bill. It is simply not acting on the bill. That is it. That's all you have to do, is just do nothing. It's the easiest thing to do, is to kill a bill. Incredibly hard to make a bill work. Because to make a bill work, you need to get a lot of people in a lot of places active and organized on that bill. You need to have people that are asking leadership, whether it's the president pro tem, or it is the speaker, or it's the majority leader in either chamber, or it could be working with the other side and making sure that one thing that the Republicans have a lot of power with in this state is controlling the clock. So this year is a short session, meaning that we're going to have 9 or 10 actual session days to pass bills. Meaning that if people don't love your bill and they threaten to talk for 4, 6, 10, 20 hours, then your bill is going to die. Unless it's a caucus priority, it doesn't matter that it's your priority, because in that time, we could have passed maybe 30 other bills that people don't find toxic. So a lot of the work is just communicating really well with people and making sure that there are no roadblocks. But to your point, it's just usually not talking about a bill will kill a bill if you're in the position of a chair or leadership.
Okay. Now, have your interests changed from when you were just a rep to when you were a chair of a committee?
So there's been a general change. I would say that when I first got elected, because Labor and the Working Families Party are the ones that approached me and helped me with that initial process, a lot of my verbiage out the gate was about the $15 minimum wage increase, was about paid family and medical leave. I was then and am now still a major advocate of tax reform. But once those got over the finish line and I was really free to, not that I wasn't ever not free, but there was other work that Labor was doing and they weren't doing it through my committees, so I just became just another rank and file member. I got to take off the Labor hat where I am definitely an ally, but I got to just look at the world through a very neutral lens and try to figure out what was personally important to me in terms of the changes that we could create. Because what is really exceptional about this role is that anything that you look at the world and through your lens, and whatever problems you see, you can try to address through government. It's not all possible. It's a lot of work, and you need to know the process really well. And simply recognizing a problem is not the same as coming up with a solution. Those are also two very different skill sets. But you have a lot of tools at your disposal to be doing good in the world, and I think government is a great place to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's what I have found is that my range of awareness and range of things that I want to work on is continuously evolving, continuously growing, and that's what's so exciting about the work, is that it can be anything that you want it to be.
Right. Now, Hamden is predominantly Democratic, right?
That's correct.
And so it's probably a little easier to run in a town like that.
I can speak my mind at will in a town like Hamden. That's correct.
Okay, and then the state legislature is predominantly Democratic.
We have somewhere in the high 90s, it's somewhere between 96 and 98 Dems right now. There's special elections. I'm not always keeping exact track, but there's 151 total representatives. There are 36 senators. So we have a comfortable majority. If we had over 100 representatives that are Democrats, we would have a supermajority. We don't have that.
Yeah.
We had a supermajority for a split second in the Senate when we had 24, but then we lost a special election that had 23. But we have comfortable majorities in both chambers. But when I first started, we were 79-72 in the House. And what that meant is if you lose 4 Democrats, you have 75, right, and 75 to 76, and your bill dies, which means that you would think that with 79-72 that Democrats can do whatever they want. But very often you have a voting bloc of 4 people that say, we have a lot of power. We can change what this legislation does and doesn't do. And very often that's what was happening, which is why the first 2 years that I was elected, it was very hard to get legislation passed, especially in my mind, what was important progressive legislation. It just wasn't happening that year, or those 2 years.
Also now, being a Democrat and having a Democratic governor, how does he work with the Democratic group?
So I think Governor Lamont, because he was never elected to the State House and didn't know the legislative process, I believe he was elected locally for a little bit. I would say that, especially out the gate, I think we could see how green he was. I would look at the toll bill or the issue of putting tolls on highways to get the revenue that we need to ensure that our infrastructure is staying up to date and staying current, and something that we as a group really failed miserably on. I would say that when you're in these roles, one thing that's really important is to figure out your message and really stick with it. And that because there's so many of us, going back and forth on what you're trying to accomplish ends up meaning that no idea ever really can cohere. And that's really what happened in the first couple years. I think that over time that he has built out his administration with people that know the process better. I think there's this idea that if you're in business, you get people that are really adept with the business world, you get them in there and they'll fix everything. But so much of government is not even so much about process as it is about people and the relationships that you have. And because he came in with so many people that didn't have those relationships, a lot of things didn't work very well because everybody has an incredible amount of power. And if one person doesn't like what you're doing, that one person can totally derail that whole thing. That's what is both incredibly frustrating, but in some ways beautiful about the process, because you really need to have relationships with everybody. Right. You need to get along with everybody. And that was part of my own personal development as somebody who came in from the outside with my elbows out, really ready to fight. And then what ended up happening was I was totally ineffective because I didn't spend time building those relationships. The next 4 years I did, and now I'm a chair, able to get legislation passed, work on a bipartisan basis. Still fighting for the things that I believe in, but also being easier on the people so that we can actually get things done. So in terms of where our governor is, I think that, I would contrast him with Governor Malloy, who we had for 8 years before Governor Lamont. Governor Malloy apparently, seemingly, did not care about being liked. But he was a very fierce governor, and he was a very adept legislator in a lot of ways. So he knew the process very well, and he knew how to control the pocketbook in a way that we were able to get things done. And a lot of what we're seeing now, even though Governor Malloy was really disliked in a lot of areas, both inside and outside of the party, a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the amount of money that we have in the state as a bolster against any downsides, and putting money away towards a lot of these union agreements that we made over the past 40 or 50 years, we're in much better shape because of what we saw for those 8 years. I would contrast him to Governor Lamont, who I think is more likable and I think cares more about being liked, but I don't see him in the same vein as Governor Malloy as being really policy heavy. I think that he just wants government to be run well and run efficiently. But I think that there's a component of government where, if we have some extra money and we have people that are suffering, then I think it's our responsibility to be helping those people right here and right now, while also thinking about the long term and thinking about efficiencies. So, I think that they both had pros and cons. I don't agree with everything about either of them in terms of the way that they comported themselves, but who would I agree with 100%?
Yeah, right.
It's a tough job.
That's true. And speaking of tough jobs,
Yes.
I understand that you are a person who would like to be the state of Connecticut Secretary of State.
Yes, I technically have an exploratory campaign, and we have been in the process of converting. The conversion will happen before the May 7th convention, but yes, I am one of what is now 5 Democrats in the race for Secretary of the State. It used to be 7, it dropped down to 6 about 2 months ago, and as of 4 or 5 days ago, we are now down to 5. And for me, that's less than it was, which I'm grateful for.
Yep.
People, when they hear that it's 5, are just 5? There's 5 of you in this race? So, yes.
Well, if you were to become the Secretary of State for Connecticut, what would be your primary focus?
So I'm thinking about this race in 2 different ways. I'm thinking both of the fact that it is an executive branch position, so you need somebody who is going to be a good manager of that role. And then it is also a spot where you can really push policy that aligns with the office. And so you can be an incredible voice for progressive legislation. So in terms of why I think that I'm a good fit, I usually point to 3 things, and which I've already touched on. The fact that I'm an attorney, and I'm the only attorney in this race. The fact that I am a small business owner owning 2 natural food stores. We have just shy of 100 employees between both, so I know how to manage people and manage an organization. And then lastly, being a 3-term legislator and knowing the process really well and being a chair of a committee, I think really helps in terms of not just the relationships, but the process, which is our 2 discrete notions. So that's why I think I'm a good fit. But then in terms of why I am in this in the first place, I am a very policy-heavy person and policy-minded person. And I'm running on 3 things there. And so I've been working with this organization called Vote at Home out of Colorado. Colorado, Washington, Oregon pioneered this model about 15 to 20 years ago, and now 7 states follow it. And it's 2 primary components, and that is anywhere from 2 weeks out to a month out to vote, and opt-out versus opt-in, meaning that what you'll have noticed over the past couple of years is you apply for a ballot, you receive that ballot, then you vote with that ballot. In an opt-out system, we in government assume that once you are registered, you want that ballot every single cycle unasked. And it just makes total sense. And the people that live in these states recognize how good it is. And then they come to a state like ours and they see how backwards we are. But people that are here that haven't seen it don't know how antiquated our system is compared to other states that are really doing this well. So that's the first of 3 things, the really big one. The other 2 are issues I've been working on for about 6 years and haven't gotten traction within the legislature, so I'm taking the show on the road through my campaign. The first is ranked choice voting.
I love that.
Yep, and now finally you have fair vote and common cause, and you have over 50 municipalities that are going to be implementing ranked choice by next year, and you have Maine and Alaska and New York City, and you have so many places that are now using ranked choice. It no longer seems like this crazy far out thing because it's now being implemented in places. So that's very exciting, because what I wanted to do through this campaign was really just normalize some of these things for people and talk about them. I don't have to convince a single person. I believe that being convinced is an act of that person that they take on themselves, but at least I can plant these seeds for people. So ranked choice voting has been one of my priority bills for a number of years, and now it's exciting to see other people use this as a topic.
Before you leave that,
Hit
I'm
me.
sure there's some folks who may be viewing this that don't know what ranked choice voting is.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about ranked choice. The third of three things is just voting rights for people who are incarcerated. Happy to talk about that too. So ranked choice voting. So for those of you that don't know what this is, basically two things. One, as the voter, you vote in order of preference for the candidates that you like. And in terms of the candidate, you cannot win with a bare plurality of the vote. You must win with a majority of the vote. And what will ultimately happen is all the ballots will end up getting collected in one place.
Yep.
You'll tally all the ballots. And then if nobody hits 50%, whoever's in last place gets knocked off and they're not tallied in future rounds. You tally again. Whoever's in last place gets knocked off, and you keep going until somebody hits 50%. There's a number of reasons why this is good. And the reason this was implemented in the first place in Maine is they had a far-right candidate, Governor LePage, who won with a bare plurality of the vote, and people thought that he did a terrible job in their state, and that is what convinced them that ranked choice voting would have eliminated the possibility of him being governor, because you no longer have a spoiler candidate.
Right.
So anybody who's an independent or a green or an unaffiliated or whatever the case may be who comes in, and they may be a great candidate and you may love them, if you vote for them, it ends up being a vote that gets taken away from somewhere else. And so it can very often change the outcome of an election, a Perot, for example. And by having ranked choice, by allowing people to both vote for who they want and against who they don't want, is a really powerful way to bring people in that feel that their vote doesn't matter,
right.
that feel that they have to vote strategically as opposed to just who they want. And it also has the tendency to make races more congenial as well, because as the candidate, there's actually a benefit to being somebody's second favorite.
Yep.
And so, for example, I am operating with a ranked choice voting mentality for the Secretary of the State's race. And with 5 people, you know, your favorite could be any one of us, but I would love to be your second favorite,
Yeah.
because up in Hartford for the May 7th convention, if your favorite ends up getting out before me, then I have a good chance of getting your vote.
Yeah.
And we too are going to be waiting until somebody hits 50% plus to figure out who the
Sure.
endorsed candidate is going to be. So I'm happy to have a conversation with everybody, and I'm not going to disparage anybody because I want to work with everyone.
Right. We have 54 seconds left
All
of our
right.
get together. Anything else you
Time
want to add
flew.
that I didn't get to?
No, I would say that I am taking a very specific tack in this race of pushing policy that's been important to me for a long time. I think for the context that I provided to myself was that it wasn't about the win. It was about pushing policy, building relationships, and trying to normalize ideas, because I think of politics as being much larger than just what my own personal successes or defeats are. So I enjoy the process, and it's been great. And I'm glad that this brought me here to this show today.
Well said, and enjoy the kickball game that you're heading to right after this.
Democrats versus Republicans, going
All
to be
right.
up at the Yargoat Stadium.
Beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. I had fun. Did you have fun?
I had a great time.
All right. Hope you had fun too. Fare thee well.